It's back. A lot of you won't know what's back, but it's back. The weekly mailbox is here. The weekly Q and A is basically what it is for all of you guys that have no clue what I am on about. But, that happens very often, that no one has a clue what I am on about. But what this series is going to be is very straightforward. Once a week, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, haven't decided which day just as of yet, there will be your weekly Q and A. 5 questions from anything you fancy asking me about, and today we are going to be discussing Formula One's best and worst bits, Formula One versus Formula E. Is there a Mercedes domination? Gasly, what about his replacement or potential replacement over the season? And Daniel Ricciardo's move to Renault and future implications. But our first question, the series is back, comes from Jack, and he asks, if every current F1 driver was in the exact same car one race weekend, what do you think would be the qualifying top 3, the qualifying last 3, the race top 3, the race last 3, and the DNF? So, this is a question that is very difficult to answer, so thank you very much for this one, Jack. And I thought it was a bit of a fun one, a bit of a unique one to restart this series. So, let's start with quali then. Top 3. I think you got to put Hamilton up there. I think Hamilton is one of the best and has the most pole positions of all time. So he's definitely going to be in that top 3. I'm also potentially looking at Max Verstappen. Tendency last season, especially at the beginning of the season, to make a few mistakes in the race, but those seems to have almost been ironed out a little bit. But in qualifying last year, he was comfortably quicker than Daniel Ricciardo, so I'd throw him into the mix. A lot of people know I love Charles Leclerc. I think he's going to be a very special driver this season. And Sebastian Vettel, who I give a lot of hate for, is still the quicker of the two. So I think we'll go for qualifying. We'll say Hamilton, Verstappen, and then Vettel. That's my top 3 in qualifying. My last 3, a little bit harder. I will put Kubica down there. Again, as much as it pains me to say, Kubica, I think, could be in that bottom 3. Lance Stroll, historically just not great at qualifying. And then it gets a little bit trickier, but I will say Giovinazzi. I think he's not quite settled into Formula One yet, so I'd put him down the back. And in the race, it's not too dissimilar. I think you'd see Hamilton and Verstappen at the front of the race, but I think you'd see the likes of Ricciardo working his way through, so maybe you can throw him into the mix. I'd love to see what Leclerc's going to be able to do in an equal car. I'd love to see guys like Norris and Russell and even Albon see what they could do in an equal car. So I'd go Hamilton, Verstappen, and Ricciardo as my top 3, and DNF. I mean, as much as it pains me to say, it's probably got to be Grosjean. But our second question comes from Aldas. You might know Aldas, big F1 YouTube channel. He's doing megabits, but he has asked, considering Ferrari should have won the Bahrain Grand Prix, do you think it's premature that everyone is claiming that there'll be a Mercedes dominance in 2019? And yes, oh my God, thank you, man, for asking this question. Because yes, why? Where has this come from? Yes, well, we understand where it's come from. I'll take that back. I mean, 3 1-2 finishes in a row is megabits from Mercedes, and you've got to take your hats off. Even if you hate Mercedes, that's a bloody good job from the Silver Arrows. Ferrari should have won in Bahrain, so Aldas is correct. But if you look at the race weekend, they should have comfortably won. Probably more, well, a similar sort of gap to how Mercedes won in China. So I think saying a Mercedes domination is far too early. It's obviously a buzzword and people will use it to grab you, get headlines. I get that. That's fine in a sense of the word, because obviously 3 1-2s in a row, it indicates, and especially to a more casual fan who just maybe follows the results and doesn't watch the full race, yeah, they probably would start thinking that sort of way. But no, I think especially this weekend in Baku, it's race week, everybody, so buzzing. But in this weekend in Azerbaijan, I think Ferrari will be the team to beat. We thought that in China, and they weren't, so potentially there could be a little bit of an upset on the cards once again, but plenty of long straights. Should be a Ferrari-suited circuit, but like we saw in China, track temperature can really mess things around. We saw the Haas team is awful in circuits where tyre temperatures can't build up, and so in Bahrain they struggled, China they struggled. So potentially, if the track temperature's not quite there, that could mix things up a little bit. But no, I think, yeah, Mercedes domination a little too early to be saying, and I think some people say we've had it for the last couple of years. I also don't agree with that. So Ferrari will be back, and they definitely will be in the championship hunt, but yeah, they're going to have to hurry up. Another friend of the channel, the F1 Debate Show, they ask, if there was one thing you would take from Formula E and put it in Formula 1, what would it be? And vice versa. Difficult question, because I think, I was just thinking about this the other day actually. Formula 1, the reason why it's so special is because of the history. Because of what it means to win a Formula 1 race. That is one of the fundamental things. Whereas Formula E is so new, and yes, the racing is closer, but people don't take to it as much for several different reasons. But for me, what I found hard to get into Formula E wasn't the sound, wasn't necessarily the drivers, but because the history wasn't there. And that was a big stepping stone for me. But that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that Formula 1 can take away from Formula E closer cars. That is huge. And the fact that Formula E is so dynamic that you never know who's going to win, that's great. That's what we want to see in Formula 1. However, I'll put my hands up. Formula E, in that sense, can be very, very gimmicky. So, I'll say from Formula E to give to Formula 1, closer racing. And I know that sounds stupid, but that's what I will say. Just closer racing, cars, aerodynamically, that can follow much closer. That's what Formula 1 needs to gain. Formula E, a little bit different, because they want to try and... That's the difficulty with this question, is they both series want to diversify themselves to be completely opposite. So I'd love to say Formula E needs the sound, needs the power of Formula 1, but I don't think they're fundamental things to the series that they need to take away from Formula 1. So, for me, and I think I've said this a few times, Formula E, its next big stepping stone, which has definitely helped this season, is drivers, high-profile drivers. So I'm going to say that, and I'm sorry if that's cheating the question. I know you wanted me to say something like attack mode, Formula E should give to Formula 1, that kind of thing, but I think Formula E, for me, needs to get big drivers, whether it's a Raikkonen, an Alonso, someone like that. That's what I'm looking at from Formula E. Next question from Nexus John. If Gasly doesn't perform, who do you think will replace him? Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, man. It's been a little bit all over the place at the moment, so hopefully we can get back into the swing of things. This weekend's going to be chaotic. We got Formula 1, Formula 2 and Formula E. So yeah, hopefully things should be back on track. But to John's question, Nexus John's question, Gasly. Who will replace him? Now, John didn't say this in the question, but in the fact that he's asked the question itself, I want to highlight this. That I think this season, Gasly won't be replaced, no matter what he does, unless he gets a race ban. But apart from that, I think he's not getting replaced. The ideal candidate for Red Bull would be Dan Ticktum, their young driver, who's a little bit rough around the edges, shall we say, but he's a character, and Formula 1 needs more characters, so I won't talk about too much about Dan Ticktum today, but he's a Red Bull young driver in their junior program, and ideally they want to bring him into Toro Rosso next season, and then hopefully promote him to Red Bull if he is quick enough. But Gasly, he's not had an easy time at Red Bull, has he? And bear in mind, he's up against Max Verstappen, but Verstappen was up against Ricciardo, those two were super, super close. Gasly comfortably beat Brendan Hartley, had some really impressive results, so we didn't think he'd be miles away, but in actual fact he's been further away than I thought he was going to be. So it's been a disappointing start for Gasly, a big improvement in China, but even though he was one place, or two places actually, behind on track, race pace was still nowhere near. Who do I think will replace Gasly? If they do look to replace him at the end of the season, I think they're going to have to look outside, whether that's bringing in someone from Toro Rosso. I think unlikely, even if Albon has a really good start to the season or first season, I think it's unlikely they'd swap out Gasly so quickly. Likewise with Kvyat, I think that would be unwise, I would say, to throw in Kvyat and maybe next year get rid of Dan Ticktum. Constant change in drivers is always a little bit messy. I think if they, like I say, had to change him mid-season, had to change him at the end of the year, they would try and look outside. maybe at someone like Carlos Sainz, who I know has gone to McLaren at the moment, but maybe they'll try and sway him. Maybe Hulkenberg, they think they could potentially get a couple of seasons out of him. Someone like that who maybe is a little bit more flexible on contract, would like a big chance in a big team. That's who I think they go for in the short term. But long term, you're looking at your Albons, you're looking at your Tictums. And our fifth and final question for our return to the weekly mailbox is from Nebras. Do you think Daniel Ricciardo deserves a better seat somewhere else? If yes, which team should it be with? Difficult question. That's why I wanted to put it in, but it's also why I left it to the end, because I sort of want to leave it open to you guys. If Ricciardo was to leave Renault, where do you think he should go? Throw that in the comments section below. But is he at the right team? I think so, yes. And I spoke in length about this over the winter, that the Max Verstappen effect, while I personally don't think it's the key reason he moved, it was a big factor. And nobody can deny that Verstappen was taking over that team. Verstappen was quicker in quali and most of the time race trim at the end of the season. So it made sense for him to move on. It did, and he needed to establish himself within a team as a number one driver. So looking at the market at the time, Renault was the best choice. Lead in the midfield, works team. But does someone of Ricciardo's talent deserve to be in the midfield? And I think that's where this becomes a little bit more trickier, because no, I don't. I think Ricciardo, when he's in a top team, has the potential to be a world champion. And some people disagree with that one. And I think last year didn't do him any favours with the unreliable car he had, with Verstappen coming of age. But I think when you really look at his results and what he's able to do, he is the best overtaker on the field. And yes, what he can't do in qualifying, he makes up in the race. So I'd love to see him back at the front. He's got reliability issues already at Renault. So I think if an opportunity came up at a Mercedes, at a Ferrari, this guy would be one of the first calls you make, especially at Ferrari. Because I think if Vettel moves on, there's no clear line of succession, especially if Vettel retires at the end of this year or the next. Because they're not going to throw in a Giovinazzi who's struggling, they're not going to throw in a Schumacher at the deep end, and I think it's unlikely that Raikkonen would go back. So realistically, someone like a Ricciardo, who historically doesn't cause many political issues within a team, would be a really good pickup for a Ferrari. So I think he could move on. If things don't quite go the way, I think if he has a chance to go to one of these teams, if maybe Hamilton leaves Mercedes, Mercedes get rid of Bottas and Hamilton, he could go there. So there's lots of options for Ricciardo, but I'd love to know what you think, because seeing him at McLaren, if they made a resurgence, would be really cool as well. But it's all about what teams are going to be able to progress over the next few seasons. But right now, I think he's in the right place. But that is your lot for the weekly mailbox, your weekly Q&A. I might change the name up a little bit. I'm not too sure. Playing with a few ideas. Let me know in the comments below. And also, if you got comments for next week, throw them down below. I will be picking my favourite 5, all about Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula E, or anything you really fancy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.